control is sort of like for the early part of their life, you were the pilot and they were the co-pilot. They were kind of going along, trying to figure out how to run their life when it was time for them to run the life. You get into adolescence and you're kind of saying, it's your life to lead, right? You now need to take the primary role on a lot of this. You sit in the pilot seat, I'll sit in the co-pilot seat, and I still have an important role, but this is your plane to fly. If a parent gets all freaked out because it looks like they're driving the plane right into a mountain, and your solution to that is to jump back into the pilot seat and take over because you're saying that they're being inadequate at solving the problems of life, you risk the idea that your pilot in that moment, as you're trying to take over, can hit the eject button and boop, your seat's out of the plane, and now they're driving into the mountain without you.
Welcome to the Family Dialogues podcast. If childhood is changing faster than ever before, what does it really take to raise teens who still talk to us, trust us, and choose to stay connected, even when everything in them wants more freedom? Today we're asking, what happens when parents move from controlling teens to truly influencing them? And how can strong relationships become the most powerful protection our teens have in a complex world? To help us unpack this, we are joined by parenting expert Alyson Schafer. Alyson Schafer is a family counselor and parenting expert. She is the author of 3 best-selling books with HarperCollins Canada and the host of Canada's #1 parenting podcast, Parenting the Adlerian Way. Alyson is an international speaker and regular guest on many media outlets. She manages the Alyson Schafer Parenting Teens Facebook group, which is a great place to find community, support, and ongoing access to Alyson's advice through her posts and live Q&As. Alyson, welcome to our podcast.
Oh, I'm absolutely honored to be here and to connect with you again. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for listeners, we have to give the backstory quickly before we get into the teens. You know, I will say Alyson is part of the reason this podcast is possible in a way from, I would say 14 years ago, I think, because in 2021 or before that, when I reached out to you, I think in 2009, 2010, thereabouts, I saw you on the parenting show on Rogers TV in Canada when I was living in Canada. And I loved what you were saying regarding the advice and your books. So I reached out to you and you invited me to the parenting class and gave me some of your books. And the rest is history, I guess, because you encouraged me as it relates to what I should do regarding my PhD studies. And I went into studying and focusing on parenting for my dissertation. And now I am now doing the podcast. But before that, I had a vision of a parenting show similar to yours. And in January 2011, you invited me to the Rogers studio and I actually recorded a pilot, but with life, with PhD and starting a family and all of that, it just took the back seat. And here we are 14 years later. It is not the traditional parenting show. It is now a podcast. So you gave me the inspiration. Yeah. So you gave me the inspiration since then to really do the parenting show, and life just happens. And here we are now in 2026 to do the actual podcast that is, you know, the modern version of a parenting show, because everything is moving from traditional media to online. So thank you so much. And that's the backstory that Alyson actually had a hand in all of this becoming possible.
Well, it's been a privilege to watch your support, and mentor, if you want to use that word, but to watch your career flourish. And just before we went live, you were giving me some updated information because, you know, it's mentorship works 2 ways. You know, you're living in the modern age and you know a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know. And I appreciate you sharing your intel, as well as we both have very much the same mission to help families. So that's just really, really awesome. And I cherish your friendship.
Yes, and you are my mentor as well. So you have been definitely guiding me over the years. And thank you so much. Part of this whole thing of parenting, we have the issue of a lot of parents dread the teenage years. Right? I've heard parents say it's in the teenage years that they get their PhD in parenting because they thought they had it all together. And then they get to the teenage years and they're wondering what happened to my sweet, loving child, all these mood swings, all these conflicts, not wanting to hang out with me, and they're completely shocked. So I think it's important to have you as an expert in teen parent-child relationships to really guide us on what is really happening. And to start the conversation is to really ask you, a lot of parents are surprised by the changes that happen in the teen years. And can you explain the 3 stages of being a teenager, and importantly, why there is such an increase in conflict and differences at the beginning of adolescence?
A great way to kick off the conversation. I mean, first thing I would say to parents is, don't forget to take a moment to walk down memory lane or start talking to some of your friends about what their adolescent years were like, because you kind of get the middle-aged business guy that ends up telling you, I lived in a minivan and followed a band for 4 years. And you're like, oh, really? You work in accounting and you wear a suit and you're bald. Like, where is that spirit? There's a lot of things that happen in adolescence that are, I think, super interesting and super exciting. And we all need to remember what our adolescence was like, to remember that it's a really unique phase in the development of a human being. And it's a limited phase, and it's an important phase. And in fact, to your point, it's actually more granularly broken down into 3 phases. And it starts much earlier than parents think, because parents think the word teenager means that you have to be 13, because it finally adds the word teen to the number. But the truth is, adolescence starts really, there's some disagreements about it. You'll see different sources will have different numbers exactly. But basically, 9-10 is the beginning of adolescence. And that's shocking to parents to think that, what, my 10-year-old is an adolescent? So 10 to 14 is early adolescence. Middle adolescence is 15 to 17. Later adolescence is 18 to 21. And I think that's important because it's really only recent research that has shown us that the brain is still developing way longer than we used to believe. It really takes the prefrontal cortex, and all that development really is still happening until 21. Now, why I say know that things are going to start happening early is that a lot of parents think that I don't need to talk to my kids about sex and drugs and smoking and vaping until they're in high school. When in fact, a lot of those adolescent behaviors actually start in middle school. At the younger age of things is when they do a lot of these experimentations. And the parents are then, I was ill prepared. I knew it was coming someday, but I didn't know it was going to come multiple years before. Please be ready for that, and don't be hyperly disappointed when your your grade 7 student. Do you say grade 7? How do you say it in German?
Yeah, we have grade 7.
Grade 7. Okay,
Class 7. Yeah.
Seventh grade in the US. Every kind of has a different way of doing it. But so when you suddenly have somebody who's in 7th grade and they've stolen alcohol from your cabinet and they've gotten drunk and underneath the slide at the school, and you're like, what? How am I dealing with drinking at this age? So it tends to take parents out at the knees. So I say a lot of these things are going to happen earlier than you think. Not to be frightened of that. Just be prepared for that. I think that's a lot of what we're trying to parent education is about, preparing parents for the reality of these different ages and stages. So know that these things happen earlier than you think. And the second piece around that is one of the preparatory pieces is to talk to children about things before they're in the middle of those situations. So it's a lot easier to talk to your kids about drinking and vaping before those have ever shown up in their social world, because they're not feeling defensive. They're still open. They still want to have these conversations. Whereas if you ask somebody who's already, vaping with their friends and you say, well, what do you think about vaping? They're like, hey, I don't want to have this conversation. Get away, get out of my space. They're kind of shut down. But, you ask somebody in grade 4 about, hey, what do you think about these things that you see out in the world? What do you think that's about? You can have a much more engaged educational conversation because that person is still being open-minded, not defensive about the topic. So we really have to like start moving backwards. You know, parents that are nervous to talk about sex, or they think if they talk about these topics that it's going to, there's a false belief in parents that if I talk about sex, they'll start having sex. If I talk about vaping, they'll start vaping. And this is not the truth from a data evidence-based perspective, that the earlier that you give kids armed with information, the more we reduce harmful behaviors in our children. So that is, don't take your assumption. Let's go with what data and research proves, which I know that you're a big science fan and you're always looking for evidence-based data. So I'm sure that parents will appreciate that in your podcast. So I think those are three important stages. Things are going to happen faster than you think. Get yourself prepared in having these conversations earlier. But the other thing that I think is fascinating, and sorry if I'm totally monologuing here.
Oh, that's fine. You're the experts for this topic, so I'm sure parents are taking notes. So
okay, well, here's the thing. This is the thing I want. This is the part that I like, just really gets me excited. Is, you know, my training is in Adlerian psychology, but I'm also, Adler was very influenced by Charles Darwin, and Charles Darwin brought some really interesting things to the evolutionary story of human beings. And so in evolution, there are many in the mammalian class of animals, of which we are one, Homo sapiens are mammals. There is this period called adolescence in many animals that are mammals. And adolescence is this very specific time because it's longer in higher ordered animals. So in humans, adolescence actually takes a tremendously long amount of time. If we're saying that it starts at 10 and it doesn't end till 21, that's a long span of time to be evolutionarily in the adolescent phase. Whereas some animals that only live 5 years, adolescence might be 3 months. Do you know what I mean? So higher ordered animals have longer adolescence. We have a longer adolescence. But the idea of what is happening, why we get to call it adolescence, is because it's a phenomena of the brain that is very highly neuroplastic. So this is where what we see is that you inherit genes, you experience your exogenous factors, you're experiencing life around you. And because of neuroplasticity, this is when the DNA, and this is when the changes and the advancement of the species gets to like lift itself up to the next level of evolutionary adaptation. And then it kind of gets baked in because we lose that neuroplasticity. And then you're an adult, and then you're boring, and then you just get into habit, repeat, your brain structures are set, that whole, hard to teach old dogs new tricks kind of a thing. So there's this really unique phase where it's like, this is where we're going to start changing the world. This is where we're going to catapult and advance humankind. And yet, what do we say to adolescents? You're stupid. You're young. You don't know. You think you're a grown up, blah, blah, blah. And we tend to really denigrate them. So, I find that this is like an absolutely important time to capitalize on, and to know that part of what they're doing is they are trying to break down old systems and create new ones. And so how we see that in adolescence is they really are allergic to authority. They're like, they're trying to break down what was pre-existing. And that includes their parents. That includes pretty much all forms of authority. They don't like authority. And so what we see is there is a genetic initiative or drive that wants them to evolve, but it also wants them to start making that leap from leaving the creature comforts of being in a nuclear family to being out in the bigger world and being embedded with peers. So peer world is really important. So when you see behaviors like kids hanging out in their bedrooms, kids hanging out online, they're hanging out online because that's where their friends are. It's the new mall or playground, or, it's where their friends are. Their friends are online. They start creating things that parents can't understand. So they have music that parents hate. It's too loud. Every generation has this, right? Elvis, Presley gyrated his hips too much and they thought he was crazy. Every generation has to kind of push that. So they do it with music, they do it with clothing, they do it with their own made up language. Like, I don't know if you have this in Germany. Is 6-7 a big thing in Germany?
I am not sure now because remember, my teen is now in Canada on your side of the world because he's at university. So I'm missing up when he was with us. I knew everything because I wanted to know the latest, how they speak and all of that. But now that he's on his own, there's kind of like a void now. So I'm kind of behind. I'm not sure. But I've seen the 6-7 thing online in general, but I don't know if it's here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, part of it will be cultural, but it's taken off like wildfire. And again, it's like they love perplexing the adults. And so all the adults are online talking. We're like, what's this 6-7? Why does my kid keep saying 6-7? It's like they have their own private joke, their own private language. And they love that. They're connecting. So I see all these elements that coming together. And imagine what that's like as a parent, because then here's a parent who said, I had this very compliant child and I loved it because I was, given the task of raising my baby to be a good human being and to do well at school and have their extracurriculars. And now suddenly I'm getting this person who's sloppy, messy, has bad manners, talks back, doesn't want to be with me. Who is this person? And there's a lot of, fear that comes up that I am losing control, that they're showing these attributes that I don't like. Because I think if their bedroom is messy now, what's it going to be like as an adult? If they don't care about their studies, then they're not going to go to university. They'll fail out as an adult. So a tremendous amount of fear starts to come up as they go through what is developmentally appropriate in adolescence. And from that fear, parents tend to double down. And the doubling down is where they get really controlling. So it's sort of that, I don't trust in you well enough to manage life on your own. So I'm going to impose some control. So now I'm going to say, you've got to get your homework done and I'm going to check all your paperwork and I'm going to nag you and remind you and bark at you. And then we start, those behaviors in parents lead to kids pulling back even more emotionally. So we're doing it out of our best intentions of trying to get things back on the rails, but unwittingly we're pushing kids farther and farther away from us. And so we're shredding this relationship. And that's a real problem. That's why a lot of parents come to counseling, is that they have fractured some of these relationships with their adolescents, and they're getting into some real concerns and worry about their behaviors.
I think every parent goes through the same thing. Because the teenagers not wanting to have the authority over them anymore, and they want the freedom. And here you come wanting to put even more control on them because the world is kind of a messy place, and you're wondering what will happen if you don't do the control. What kind of mindset shift do parents need to then take? Because it feels like they perhaps were managing their children before, and now this super independent person who is gravitating towards their friends, not wanting to hang out with the family anymore. And they feel like they're, as you said, they feel like they're losing their teens. So I think, first of all, it might need to be a mental mindset shift. What kind of parenting shift do they first need to take mentally, and then, going forward to kind of maintain that healthy relationship with their teens?
Yeah, so I hope that, like, understanding it developmentally, that's what their kids are supposed to be doing. If you just writing
and don't take it personally too. The need for independence and not liking authority doesn't mean they don't love you. It's not anything to do with you. It's an innate thing in them that, hey, this is a stage to test boundaries, to test authority, and so on. I think a lot of parents take it personally.
Yeah. I mean, that's what if you understand what adolescence is about, you're more likely to go, look there's my teen acting exactly like an adolescent should, and the more you get educated about what are typical behaviors for a teenager, the less that you take it as, I am falling short of my job responsibility of being a good mother. And then so we can drop the ego and realize this is normal development. And then that idea of that this is the time to start switching up your parenting methods. And what I mean by that is, we talk about there's sort of 4 basic parenting styles. This goes back to the original,
Baumrin.
Baumrin, doing all her studies, right? Basically this combination of firm and friendly at the same time. we've seen this with other leadership styles in the workplace. With Lewin did work back with the military around it. There's basically, this firm and friendly combination. And so trying to be two of those things at the same time is really important. That's sort of the sweet spot. Are any of us going to get perfectly firm and friendly right all the time? No. But when our kids were little, they didn't really, unless you had a really strong-willed child, you probably got away more with kind of being the more dominating, you were kind of the educator, right? We need to eat our fruits and vegetables, shoes need to go on the mat. We wash our hands when we come in from the sandbox. We kind of grew up and we liked that. We liked that educative role as a parent. So this does become, regardless of how you parented, whether you were more firm, more flimsy, there is no time for you to get it wrong now. Like, now is the time you got to really work on building up that relationship and finding that balance between the firm and the friendly, because there is a role, and a very important role, for parents to play during adolescence. They need you, even though they're not showing you that. They need you in a very deep way. They don't need you in the way you used to be there for them, is what I'm saying. So this is when we need to switch things up. And that's the idea of leaning in on the relationship and moving from control as your methodology and education as your methodology to being influential and being more of a coach. So if you have a strong relationship with your teen, then you will have their ear. And what I mean by that is teens are now independent. So they decide who they're going to be influenced by. And they're going to decide whether it's their science teacher, the rapper that they just saw at a concert, or their mother. And you want to be in the side of somebody who your teen wants to be influenced by, so that when they listen to you, they feel that there's meritorious things coming out of your mouth, as opposed to nagging and reminding and whatever. So one of the ways I explain it is, control is sort of like, for the early part of their life, you were the pilot and they were the co-pilot. They were kind of going along, trying to figure out how to run their life when it was time for them to run the life. You get into adolescence and you're kind of saying, it's your life to lead, right? You now need to take the primary role on a lot of this. You sit in the pilot seat, I'll sit in the co-pilot seat, and I still have an important role, but this is your plane to fly. If a parent gets all freaked out because it looks like they're driving the plane right into a mountain, and your solution to that is to jump back into the pilot seat and take over because you're saying that they're being inadequate at solving the problems of life, you risk the idea that your pilot in that moment, as you're trying to take over, can hit the eject button and boop, your seat's out of the plane. And now they're driving into the mountain without you. You can't be an influence. You can't be a help. If your child has evicted you from the plane as they're training into being an adult, you've lost all power over what you could be doing to help them, to say, check your wingspan, check your dials, check your whatevers. So there's a big role for us to play, but it can't be out of fear and jumping back into control. So we really want to work on influence and coaching, being along for the journey. And the only way that you can do that is if you have that strong relationship. And that can be really hard for parents, because if you're so worried that they're going to fail science, that all you do is talk about science and bark about science and scream in their bedroom door that they need to hang up their phone and study for their science test, each one of those is eroding the relationship. Whereas in an influence model, it might be, I'm really concerned that, I know that you really want to get a good, a grade point average this year. And I know your science teacher is really saying that you got to pull up your marks by about 5-10% from our last parent teacher interview. I'm just really worried that you're going to be disappointed with your choices if you don't keep those things top of mind. But, so I can share, I might say, what's your plan for getting 80% on this test? How are you going to accomplish that? How can I help you? And one of the plans might be, I'm going to study for 2 hours a night. And then you can check in and say, how's it going with the plan? Would it be helpful if we made the phone time after study time? So it's not as if you're going to be ineffectual. I think parents, if you don't kind of spell it out and show them what it looks like, there's still many, many things to do, but it's a different skill set than they've probably been trained to do thus far.
And it's a different skill set for you too, because as you describe the pilot, co-pilot scenario, where a lot of parents want to then grab back the controls, and it is all about fear. But parents who come from traditional backgrounds might see influence something to be of you're being too lenient. It's hard for traditional parents to make that switch and think, but if I'm being an influence to them, isn't that mean I'm taking away my authority that they need for that kind of structure? Wouldn't that lean to leniency? What do you have to say to parents who might be struggling with that in particular?
So it is a good point that, we're getting kind of down to semantics. So we're using a word, but like, what does that look like in real life? Is that too lenient? Is that too,
Right.
So I do it's trying to describe a boundary. It's really hard unless you hear the exact specific information, which is why I like doing kind of the Q&As on my podcast, because then I can get into the nitty gritty and the specifics, and I can have a better view of like, what's the child's responsibility? What's your responsibility? Have you taken time for training? There's like kind of a decision tree that I go through in each individual case, but it's kind of hard in general terms to kind of say what's too lenient, what's too controlling. Right. But the idea of influence, for example, if this makes any sense to parents, when they do research on substance use and substance, which leads to substance abuse, because these are addictive substances. So, say like, they interview high school students and they say, why didn't you drink at the party? No, did you or did you not drink at the party on Saturday, right? No, I didn't drink at the party. Why did you not drink at the party? And the resounding factor is they'll say, because I didn't want to disappoint my parents. So when we hold our children, if we have a good relationship with our child and we hold them in high regard, our kids don't want us to think less of them. And so if you've had a conversation about your family values and you've said, well, no, we really don't believe in underage drinking. We believe that that is a law that was established because of brain development, and they're trying to keep you safe, and early exposure leads to higher probabilities of later addiction. And we really believe that. And so, not only do I trust you to make good decisions for yourself, but you might get in a sticky situation and you can always call me. And here's a couple of lines that you can say if the bottle comes around and you're feeling some peer pressure. You can say, I've got a medical tomorrow, or my parents are going to pick me up and they're going to smell my breath and I can't be in the bad books. Help them come up with like a one-liner that feels comfortable and good for them. And a lot of these kids will say, like, they still do want to do right, do good by their parents, but they're in conflict because they feel that there's a lot of these behaviors that are required to be in with the peer group. And I just started this by saying that is actually one of the premises of adolescence, is to do the behaviors that your peer groups are doing so that you get accepted. So part of it for parents is to be able to say, and I get the double bind that you're in. And chances are they are going to make a bunch of mistakes. And probably most people are going to go through adolescence and probably have a drink and try a vape. The question is, do they become addicted? Do they start hiding that? Does it lead them down a trail that gets progressively worse? Or do they rebound and learn from their mistakes? The kids who did some experimentation and then, recovered from that are the people that have the better relationships with their families. So I'm not expecting my kid to be perfect by no stretch of the imagination. But if I said, you can't see those friends anymore and you are not going to that party on Saturday, and if I came down, like a big hammer, what that results is that kids will either hate you and then they'll just sneak around you anyways, because their prime objective is to fit in with their peers. So I would rather help them figure out how to handle the tension of that and know that I always have their back. But that's not giving permission.
Yeah. As you were speaking, I was going in memory lane because something similar happened with my eldest, where they had a class trip to a camping place, I think in Poland or Czech Republic. I don't remember which one. But the managers of the campsite forgot to take the alcohol out of the vending machine.
Oh,
yeah. And some of the children, some of his peers tried. And I asked him if he tried, and he said no. And when you said disappoint, he said he didn't want to disappoint me, But most importantly, he said he didn't want to disappoint his great grandmother. He's like, if mama found out I did that, she would have been so disappointed because he had before she died, he had such a close relationship with her that for him, if he should do something like that, that would be the worst thing. He would not want to face her disappointment when he would have to have a conversation with her. And I also remember too that, parents sometimes forget that, the peer pressure is really on. What I did with him, he had a phrase that was only secret with us. And so if his friends were pressuring him to go somewhere or something, he had that pre-saved in his phone and he would text me and I immediately call and I know whatever he asked, I should say no. So I became the bad guy, right? And he would say, oh God, my mom said I have to come and take care of my little brothers, or she needs help with something. I've got to go. And then when he gets home, I would ask him, what was that you were trying to avoid? And he's like, I didn't feel like I wanted to go there with my friends, but I gave him the out. Right. And so maybe for parents too, you have to think they're always on their phone. So it won't seem weird if they're on their phone with their friends. They could be sending a message to somebody and the friends they don't need to know that it's you. So what phrase or word can they immediately send you to get you to bail them out, because they are really still kind of immature and they don't know how to, even us as adults, sometimes we can't even manage the peer pressure and we need somebody to bail us out as well, or a spouse or a good friend or somebody. So that just reminded me, like, have an out for them to get the help that they need from you, so that they don't seem like they are corny or whatever term their friends are using these days to describe other teenagers who are not willing to engage in certain activities. So I went down memory lane. I was like, oh God, I did the right things.
And to your point, like I love that advice, and many times teens get into sticky situations where if they were to make it incumbent upon themselves to say, I'm going to leave, I don't like this, or I don't want to go to that sleepover, or people are getting too drunk, or, I don't, if they had to speak up for themselves, which of course we do in the long run want to teach our kids to speak up, but the speaking up to their level of development is speaking up to say, Mom, I need to get picked up. And of course, they can't say to their friends, I want to go home, I don't like this anymore, because then they're going to lose face with their peer group. But to be able to say, that whatever, texting that safe word, and then they're like, oh, my mom, God, my mom, I'm quite happy to be the fall guy, and so I'd love to stay. And they don't. I'd love to stay, but I just got sequestered home. My mom's such an idiot. I can't believe, she knew it was an important party, but I got to go. Oh, I'm so mad at her. So they save face. We've given them, a off ramp from teen situations that can go really crazy, and they can go really crazy fast. Things can get really out of control quickly with teens. And so that gives them a great sense of security if they know that they can really call on us, and that it doesn't come with the big moral lecture after the fact. I mean, the lecture should be the appreciation of, you did the right thing. You made a good decision. I'm glad you got yourself out of there. I will always have your back. And even if you pick them up and they're drunk and you told them, don't drink, but listen, they had 2 drinks instead of 27, like the other people that are vomiting in the corner. You're like, listen, I'm glad you called on me for safety. We can talk about this tomorrow when you're sober.
Yeah. I want us to take a step back because regarding the focusing on the relationship. So some parents might not quite know how to build that relationship before. So you might have listeners who have preteens, and they might be wondering, what are some things that I need to do to build that closeness with my teens? And you might have some parents like, oh, darn, I have a teenager and I already messed up. What do I need to do to build that closeness so I get that end result where they call on me no matter how bad the situation? So what tips do you have for parents regarding building that relationship?
Yeah, building or repairing the relationship. So one thing is, think about the activities that you engage in, and try to make them as child-led as possible. And what I mean by that is, I remember being really disappointed that my kids didn't want to go to the Christmas tree farm anymore to chop down the Christmas tree. And I'm like, what? We used to always do that. No, what they really wanted to do was to go get their nails done. And I'm like, okay, my kids are growing up. My Santa's Village and Christmas trees is out. Manicures and brunches are in. All right. So I've got to realize they're growing up. They want different things. What I want is to build a relationship. I'm not so interested in what the activity is. I got to get over myself. So find out what your kids are interested in and then try to engage around what they're interested in. If they love Harry Potter, start reading Harry Potter. If they love video games, see whether or not they'll let you watch or get your own avatar and get on the video game and start having conversations. It's like when they were little, you had to learn all the names of the Pokemon characters. It's kind of the same thing. You get interested in what your kid's interested in is one thing. And then I would say anytime you have shared activity, so that could be raking leaves, that could be painting a bedroom. Anytime you're just doing something, you're not necessarily saying, how are you? How was your day? But if you're saying, pass the paint roller, can you hand me that? You're still being collaborative. You're still being together. You're having a shared experience. And for really low disclosing teens, that can still mean a lot. Even though you're not, because we tend to interrogate. How was school? What's your science mark? What's that girl you're talking to? Who's that guy that dropped you off? We tend to be really interrogating and they don't like those topics. So I think moving into like other things, but I want to get to know you questions, like kind of like you're on a date. What's your favorite holiday? What's your favorite meal? Like just getting to know them. And there's like little card decks you can buy. There's conversation prompts that you can get. Again, a great time for talking and connecting is in the car. Like many parents in Canada spend most of their week driving their kids to practices, which is like hockey one day, Kumon the next, karate, ballet. I don't know. Kids are just always going off to some other adult, which I have a problem with from a scheduling point of view. I think it's too busy, but capitalize on that time in the car. And again, that could be listening to a podcast together that you end up having a conversation about the podcast or an audiobook. It seems to be that when two eyes are looking forward, it's a little kind of a nice setup with a little music on the background. You're listening to the radio. So if there's a quiet moment in a lull in the conversation, nobody really notices it because the radio's on. And that might be the time that you start asking some deeper questions about them.
Sometimes you don't have to ask. Sometimes they will self-disclose.
Yeah.
Because they might have something already on their mind and they just want to release it. And they're doing something with you that is so not intimidating. And so they feel free to just mention something about it. Again, I'm going down memory lane with mine because my eldest, he was a big Arsenal fan. And let me tell you something, Alyson. I followed Arsenal on Twitter, which was Twitter back then. I followed like Piers Morgan, all of those. I followed some of the athletes as well. So as soon as one of the players got traded, I run to him and said, hey, did you hear about that? And he looked at me like, how did you know that? But he had a smirk on his face like, oh, wow, she's really interested. So every time Arsenal is having a match, I am aware of it. I'm aware of the scores, all the inside politics of it. And he always said, you're so weird, Mom. Mom, you're so weird. But he didn't say it in a way as, but he said it in a way of, you're so weird with a smile on his face. And
typical.
Yeah. And we really connected with that. And I've always, one thing I love about being in Berlin is that things like supermarkets and so on are really just 10-minute, 20-minute walks, not far away from your home. They're always, these are little supermarkets all over. And we used to walk to the supermarket. And that was when I learned a lot about what's going on with him, his friends, the politics in high school, all of that, teachers and everything. He would, because we were just walking to and from the supermarket, he just released everything. And so I looked forward. I found every excuse to go to the supermarket as often as possible with him to build that. So not really.
I want parents to hear that, which is, we're saying both that they want to be hiding up in their room, but if you allow that, they will just hide up in their room. And so I do think we have to keep finding all these other opportunities and keep some of these other family things, like the requirement of coming down to the dinner table, hey, we got to go to the store and get a job done. I think it is too permissive just to say, oh, well, they're teenagers. They want to be alone. They want to hang with their friends. They don't want their parents around anymore. I'm like, no, as a parent, you need to find, and make it your mission to find positive opportunities to insert yourself in a way that might make yourself available, because if you're not there, they're very in the moment, So it's like if they got a terrible text message from a friend at school and they're all emotional about that, they're not going to want to talk to you about it tomorrow. They're like revved up about it now. And so it's very topical. So the being present so that the door is always open, should this be the moment that they want to talk. I think a lot of times parents are complicit and kind of saying, well, they don't want me anyway, so I just went off and did my own thing. And they're old enough to be home alone. So parents kind of go off willy-nilly. And I'm like, no, go hang out in the bathroom. Do your hair next to your daughter doing their hair. Like, see what comes up. Just, sit and read on them.
Just be present. Yeah, be there. Again, another memory. I'm like, I'm going through, I hope my son is okay with me sharing all of this. But I think
we'll get the final edit approval.
Yes. So, one thing he said to me, I think he was 13. When I work, I always make sure that I am home before he gets home. So he always comes and sees me home. And he said to me once that, we might not have everything that my friends have and so on, but I do like that no matter what, when I come home, you're always here. And I found that sweet. But Alyson, most of the time when he came home, hi, Mom, I'm back in the room. Boom, door is closed. So to hear that message was like, you always just run to your room, but at the same time, you're saying you like that I'm home no matter what. So I am present for when he is ready to speak, not when I am ready to speak. I think a lot of times parents are like, okay, I'm available now. Let's talk about what's going on with you. And they're looking at you weird, like, why? I don't want to talk to you right now. But you have to be there when that door opens to say, hey, what do you want to talk about? Do you want to hang out and so on, right? So, I mean, the advice you're giving me is like, giving the listeners is like, oh yes, I remember those times, and I can testify to that, parents, that it actually worked, and I learned those from you back in the day too. So, it's really wonderful to reminisce on that. I want to talk about the parents who have used punishment a lot, and now, how do they switch from punishment and control to developing agreements and discussing consequences for actions with their teenagers? Because obviously, if they continue with the punishment and control, they're going to lose their teen, and the teen is just going to pull away from them. So how do they shift to make agreements, understanding consequences, and so on?
Mm-hmm. I mean, first, and you know that a very big part of the big message that I try to get out to all the public, through all the channels that I talk to people on, is my big belief in parent education classes. And because parent education classes are going to arm you with many tools to replace punishment and rewards. If you follow that firm and friendly parenting model, there's many different brands, as you know. But if you're trying to go for that sort of democratic, positive parent, that model, if you take a class, you're going to learn a tremendous amount of tools in your parenting toolkit rather than just the two that you have now. So I really believe in parent education. Having said that, let me just give you two that I think are really important for parents to know are out there, just so that you get maybe inspired to want to sign up for a parenting class. And they're particularly good with adolescents. So one is about the idea of consequences replacing punishment. So the idea there is that I think we've all come to understand that our children are now free agents. They're going to do what they're going to do. We've tried to have influence. It's just a fact to understand that every other person on planet Earth, including your children, are independent choice-making machines. And you can't control them, but you can control you, and you can control the environment and the needs of the situation. There are things that are still within your control. So the idea of a consequence is you're free to decide, but with every decision comes an outcome. There's a consequence for every choice that you might make. So I'm not going to force you to make the decisions that I want you to make, but I'm certainly going to let you experiment with making different choices. But each of those choices is going to have a different outcome, you know? And so that really is a shift, as we were saying in the beginning, like a shift in thinking about what our job is as a disciplinarian is actually to be an educator. And so this is about teaching our children. Punishment is about dominating them and breaking them to make them obey and mind your will. Teaching them is really where to be a disciplinarian, that's to be an educator, right? So this is an education model. You're free to make choices. I trust that you're going to experiment with different choices. You're going to learn from those different choices, and then you'll pick the one that serves you best. So we've got to, as a parent, we have to set up what those consequences might be. And so it might be something as simple as, if you'd like to borrow my car, you need to return it with the gas topped up at the time that I needed the car back. And if you aren't able to do that, then you'll lose car privileges for a week. So that's not a me screaming at you, why are you late? You didn't fill up the car with gas. Oh, I'm taking away your phone. A consequence is discussed in advance. It's related to the behavior. The child knows what is going to happen. And in a best case scenario, I often bring the child into the conversation in the teen years. I don't in the little years, because it's developmentally inappropriate. By the time they're an adolescent, I would say, what would be the appropriate consequence? What do you think should happen if we're making an agreement that the car comes back full, but then in fact it's not? What should happen then? And bring them in to that conversation about creating the consequences. When you do that, it's respectful to having, input from the child, but it's also, they see the reasonableness of it because they've been participating in it. So they don't feel like it's you against me. It's like we're just coming up with an agreement together. So it's very egalitarian. It's very respectful. And because they've had a say in it, they kind of know what's going to happen down the pipeline. Does it mean they're going to bring the car home every time with the gas? Maybe, maybe not. But I'll tell you, on the times that they don't, and you have to say, yeah, I'm really sorry. We agreed no car privileges. They won't be so angry at you. But if they just arrive and they didn't, replace the gas, and then you haven't had a conversation about this, and you go, that's it, you're not using my car.
That's punishment.
That takes the exact same situation, but the way it's implemented, the style in which it's done, it does turn it to punishment. And when you punish a teenager or a child, they will either be so hurt that you get other consequences, or you get a retaliatory behavior. So maybe you don't give me car privileges, but now this weekend when, I'm out, I'm not going to abide by curfew. So you'll get some other bad behavior that comes from being punished with a teenager. So I would say use consequences. But the other thing that goes to that discussion and respect and just elevates it to a whole other level is family meetings. I really believe in family meetings, and family meetings are a format where the family comes together to talk about the business of being a family. And it's the place that we have these conversations about how are we all going to live together? What are the rules by which we're all going to be able to cooperate together and get things done? And what I love about family meetings is, instead of seeing you're a child who's misbehaving, you're saying we have a situation in the family that needs a better solution. And the minute you can move it out of your mind, your parenting mind that says, I got to discipline and control and punish this kid, to saying something's not working, we need a better solution, and you bring the child into that conversation, you'd be amazed at the creative things that reduce conflict in the family and win cooperation from your kids. Like, this is a small example, Tanisha, but like my daughter was like late coming for dinner, and I was getting mad at her because like I love cooking and I made a hot meal. Like I why am I still calling up for you to come down from your room to eat dinner? Well, when we actually brought it up at the family meeting about meal times and dinner and punctuality and things, she said, Mom, you've taught me to be a polite person. When I'm up in my room, I'm usually chatting with like up to 10, 12 people. Like, you call me for dinner and then I have to wrap up 12 conversations, and it takes me like 5-10 minutes. And I'm like, oh, well, yeah. Do you want me just to like ghost people and walk away. Like, that's rude. You've taught me not to be a rude dog. I'm like, oh, okay. Would it be helpful, if I gave you bigger lead times? I'm like, yeah. Well, how much lead time do you need to wrap up your conversation? Like 15 minutes? I'm like, great. So how about if dinner's at 6:30 and I call you at 6:15 and give you a 15-minute warning? That seems so simple, Tanisha, but I cannot tell you how many families have the most easily solvable problems when they don't turn it into interpersonal battering of against each other. Just how do we get along? How can we solve this problem? How many days of the week do you want the car? How much time do we need to spend at grandma's versus you with your friends? When are you expected to go to church and dress how? Like, you can solve a lot of these teenage problems if you set up this once a week, not on the daily, not in the heat of the moment, not when they're in a bad mood, just once a week, cover off some of the business of the family. And if you're doing them well, the teens bring a lot of problems to you. There's a lot of stuff they don't like it in the family. They want.
And as parents, you have to be open to getting that feedback without getting defensive as well, because it's one thing to say, let's have a family meeting. And as a parent, these are the issues that I am having. But then when your children, your teenagers bring up what they are having issues with regarding your behavior, your attitude, your decisions, and you might end up having a bad attitude, then they will just see the family meeting as a farce. Oh, you're just doing this to tell me what I'm doing wrong, but I cannot add to the conversation what everybody else is doing wrong to make this family more cohesive, right?
Yeah, you're not the king and the queen sitting up on the thrones and the peasants are coming and groveling on their knees to have like a change in the taxation or whatever. You're like, it's an egalitarian. You have to come in open-minded. You've got to be willing to hear it. We had, attitude is a big thing, and attitude and tone is a big thing that comes up with teens. And our family talked about it, and we made a pact that we would make this little signal that we would like tug on our earlobe, because no kid likes to hear it out loud. I just said, like, if someone hears someone but it was a two-way rule. Like, because we talk down to teens all the time too. If I start doing eyeball rolling, or I'm just like, well, you didn't have your head sewed to your shoulder. If tone came up in our family, anyone had the little noticing thing to tug their earlobe and say, pay attention, that just had tone in it. And we had this thing called level 2, where we meaning let's live a higher value, but everyone could say level 2. Everyone could tug their ear. It wasn't just I get to correct my kids. It was a two-way agreement, because we all wanted to be respectful. We all wanted to treat each other better. So, it's got to be egalitarian. It's got to be mutually respectful. It can't be higher power, lower power. You come to me with your ideas and I'll say yay or nay. That's not democracy.
Yeah. So the example you gave with your daughter and the conversation that she was having with her friends, it sounds as if that you gave lead time. You're suggesting that perhaps with certain things, parents give lead time so the their teenagers can have enough time to be able to cooperate with you. The thing, though, parents might be wondering, as it relates to this lead time and flexibility thing, how much is too much to the point that you're giving in to your teenagers all the time? What is that healthy lead time flexibility looking like? So it doesn't come across as everything you're giving into your teenagers.
Yeah. So this is where I think using the family meeting to come up with agreements and for parents to think outside the box. So I'll just give an example. Our teens are busy. They have their own priorities. They have their own values. They have their own commitments. They have their own agendas. And we just think they're indentured servants that we can just say, go load the dishwasher. We don't know what's going on in their life. So with my kids, I found that as we moved into the adolescent years, because, my kids had choir practice and they had to do homework assignments and they'd be like in group projects and they'd have to be online at a certain hour. I realized that for our family to work, I said, why don't I do all the really time sensitive stuff? Because if the dishwasher's not loaded or unloaded, then I can't make dinner. And so then everything gets backloaded onto me. Why don't I do the time sensitive stuff? And you guys do the non-time sensitive stuff, like the vacuuming and the dusting and the washing the car and the cleaning your rooms, because that's not going to throw me off of getting the family routine going. And so I know a lot of parents think, well, every child who uses a dish should put their own dish in the dishwasher. I'm like, I'm not concerned about some other rule of my kids know how to load a dishwasher. I'm just saying, I'll look after this, but I don't want to be overburdened. Then you guys need to do some non-time sensitive weight bearing in the family. So we made up our own system. It doesn't have to be like the system that everybody thinks about. But it did mean that I said to them, so would it be reasonable to say that by the time the weekend came around, that sometime during the week, you got those responsibilities looked after? And so long as they're done, then you have car privileges for either borrowing the car or getting a trip to the mall or going to your friends or having friends over or whatever. But is that reasonable to say you've now got 5 days to get your stuff done? And that gave them all kinds, and a lot of the times they did it 5 minutes before they wanted the ride to the mall. And I'm like, I don't care. Like no harm, no foul. I really didn't care. But I felt that was an agreed upon arrangement. It didn't make chaos in the house. It was respectful to how the house was being organized. And, they really did, they stuck with that. That was really fine. But that arrangement was made at a family meeting. And at the following family meeting, after trying it for a week, we said, what do we think? Do we like this arrangement? Do we need to tweak it? Do we want to try something different? There was an opportunity to make it an iterative process about how the family works. I think where leniency comes is when you've got somebody who wants a ride to school and you say, yeah, I got to get to work. I got to leave at 8:30 and the kid is still up curling their hair and, pruning and getting all beautified for high school. And you're like now late for work because you're in the driveway going, like honking the horn, going like, let's go. I think in those cases, you just, it's like, I'm available to drive you to work, but my car leaves at 8:30. Do or don't be available for 8:30. But I would, give a last like 2 minutes and then I got to go. Sorry, and then I would pull out and drive away because that's also a consequence.
Yeah. So you're setting also, it's like a boundary as well. It's not that a free for all that you're going to be sitting there and waiting on their beck and call. It's to say to them, literally, this is a time frame I have. I'm available during this time. If you can't meet that time, then maybe we can have another meeting or something about it. But this is my schedule. So they learn to respect your schedule as well. It's not that you're sitting there waiting for, as if you are their servant for whatever. So I think that's a good point so that parents don't feel that they are necessarily spoiling their children. If they look at it from your perspective, you're teaching them to be responsible. Because even in the workplace or at school, there's a timeline for everything. There's a timeline for homework, exams, different classes, and so on. So you can do whatever you want in each of those, but to transition to the next, you have to really be cognizant of the time that you have. And so you're teaching them to be responsible at home. I'm leaving at 8:30. You have to quickly do your hair, makeup, whatever. If you want to finish it in the car, fine. But at 8:30, I'm out. Right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and to your point, Tanisha, that the job of parenting is to prepare a child for the greater society in which they're supposed to be functioning in. And the truth is, do you think if you go to the airport and you were like, well, why did the plane leave? I was doing my hair. You're like, I'm sorry, but you need to be at the gate or the plane is leaving. That is a training for the reality of life. If they're taking the bus to school, the bus is not going to sit and make every kid on the bus late. The bus is going to keep going. It is training for the reality of life. And a lot of these kids whose parents have not been firm around that really think that they're going to be accommodated, and they are not prepared, and they have a massive shock when they go to university and the prof won't give them an extra day for their paper because of X, Y, and Z. And they're like, no, the paper was due. Sorry. It's some subtract marks, some give a 0. And they're like, what? I've been accommodated my whole life. What kind of mean, evil person are you? Like,
yeah.
the kid that goes to kindergarten and thinks that they're always going to be the line leader because at home they always get to pick the chair, turn the lights on and off. No, you sit here, you sit there. Guess what? In the bigger world, you don't always get to have the royal right to everything. So we need to train our kids to integrate into society.
Yeah, I think that is beautiful for parents to hear, especially those who might be concerned that it is just too democratic for me. I know some parents are concerned about, the constant, okay, I have to say no, but what are some, how would they go about deciding when to say no and to hold firm to that? Because they don't want everything their teenager asks, can I do this? No. Can I do that? No. Because again, you get your teenager to become deflated. They might become sneaky and start hiding things from you because they know you're already going to just shut it down. But there are maybe some circumstances where your no is really important. Can you give example of some of those circumstances and why?
Yeah, I mean, I try to tell the parents in my clinical practice that in adolescence, you've got three big no's where you can drop the hammer and kind of say no because I said so. I mean, I never really like to say just because I said so. I always like to say, in here's why. It isn't just because I said so. It's because I'm concerned about this, and the other thing. But the truth of the matter is parents mostly micromanage their children. So they say no to wearing that top to school. They say no to wearing, artificial eyelashes. They say no to don't date that boy. They say no to not that part. Like they say, no, you can't have that much caffeine. They say no to so many things that they're just opinionating. So kids just become oblivious to all your no's. I want parents to save their no's. I want their kids to have an experience of their parent as being a reasonable parent who tries to help them. It feels like they've got my back. They're on my team. The only time they really step in is if it's something that like would stand up. It's like my mom is a reasonable person. If she is really putting her foot down and saying, no, you really need to go to rehab. This little Coke addiction thing that you started at parties is like now out of hand. They're going to be like, my mom is not the kind of person who like puts down the big no. Like this must be something outstanding. And so don't waste, keep the gravitas for the big things, the dropping out of high school, things like that. You want to save the big no's for that. The other things I think become parts of the discussion. So it's not that I usually say to my kids, convince me. Like, let's have a good argument about this. Like, tell me why you want to do it. Tell me the good sides of it. And then I'll tell you, like, we're debating. Remember good old classic debate? I'll tell you what I'm worried about. I'll tell you what my fears are. Then and then give them an opportunity to come back and say, I don't know those parents. There's going to be no adult supervision. And they're like, well, what if you called the parents? Well, what if the older brother was there? Like, I want to, instead of just saying, no, I don't like that idea. Like, we have to show a willingness to say, hey, listen, if we can get if I can feel that the supervision is fine and you've got a ride and these conditions are met, then I'm good to go. I'm not just trying to ruin your adolescence here,
That brainstorming thing is also preparing them for the world, because then if you're saying to them, these are some of the things I don't like, what do you think the possible solutions are, then you get them to think about things they probably didn't think of before regarding the whole interacting with their peers or the environment in which they are going to go into. At least beforehand, they can think of what if something goes wrong because you had that conversation with them from beforehand. I'm curious, what are those three no's? I don't think I heard when you mentioned that for parents.
I don't have a prescribed.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't. But I'm just to get the idea into parents' heads. Imagine.
Yeah, it's three major things. Wait. Okay.
And maybe you need to say five.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, if you just think I need to preserve my ability to say, not over my dead body is this happening. You can't use that for every little thing. You've got to use the other model so that when you do say, it's so abhorrent to me, I just need you to let me have this one, that you've got more opportunity to exercise your influence that way, because you don't pull that card out often.
And I can see how that works well when you have established the family values, right? And that's where the family meeting comes in.
Yeah.
These are the values that are very important to us as family. And so if something comes up that goes against the family value, then you can say that's a no, but then, you can have the further discussion with the brainstorming and so on.
So I had a lot of freedom growing up. We had, I'm third generation Adlerian. My parents really trained us to be responsible. So I had a lot of responsibility. I was a very responsible person, very independent person, but, lived in a big house. We took in boarders and draft dodgers, and I had a very busy, chaotic house, but it was lovely and warm and terrific parents and wonderful siblings, like had really great childhood. But I was pretty autonomous but at 17, so I was very mature. I went off to leadership camp at 14. Like I was traveling on my own at 14. I was a pretty mature person. And at 17, I wanted to move in with my boyfriend. And I was still in high school because remember we had grade 13 back then, right? And that was grade 12. And my parents were like, no. And that's the first time my parents came down with the big no. Now, maybe this goes against my story because it took weeks, but I finally did move in with my boyfriend, who I then married for 27 years. And, we're still here in Kingston together, and they adored him. But that was a hard no. They could not. That was so hard for them. But when they said their big fear was actually that I would end up struggling with my marks. They were really worried about my education. You know what, Tanisha? I was so concerned for their worry about my marks. I've never done so well at school because I really didn't want them to. I knew they had told me what their fear was, right? And I'm like, I'm going to show you that you don't need to be afraid of that, So it wasn't a fight. It wasn't a disaster, but I held their hearts. Like, I'm just like, my parents are fearful. I'm going to show them I'm okay, So it all worked out for the best. But I'm telling you, when the no came down, I'm like, whoa. That was powerful. That doesn't happen a lot in our house,
Yeah, that's a beautiful example to really, I think it's so important parents neglect it. What are your family values? Because then certain hard decisions are based on your family values. Your children know your family values. So they can't say, this is so surprising. What the hell? Where did that come from? Kind of thing. That's not fair. You're being mean and so on. But if you have that as a family value, then okay. I never expected that, but can we talk about it and so on?
Yeah.
All of this discussion is about building strong relationship with our children. And I think one important thing that I am observing now, why it is so, so important, is the AI companions that are just flooding the market now. And I am seeing cases, specifically in the US, I don't know if there are any other cases of teenagers actually committing suicide, having AI psychosis, and so on, because they have become so dependent on that artificial relationship with this AI companion. So for parents, in light of what is happening now, for you to say, this is why I'm saying you need to focus on the relationship, because you do not want your children to rely on the AI instead of relying on you. So what are your thoughts on what's happening now? It's going so fast, but from what you're able to see so far.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think maybe the metaphor that would be helpful for parents to think about is think about when you were pregnant. And they would say that you need to have enough calcium, because if you don't get calcium from your diet, the baby, in order to protect its needs, is going to suck calcium from your bones. But it is going to get its needs met. So if we use that model, that children will always try to look for the good source of their needs first, and in the absence of finding it, they will get creative and find it on the negative side of life. So in the absence of good connection, they're going to seek out artificial connection. So that's why if things are going well with their friend group and their family and their in real life friends and all of the network and their community and all those things that we build in true relationships, that is the good diet of social belonging and social acceptance and social experience. But if that dries and dwindles and gets sparse, they're going to be starving for it. And that's when we start seeing them getting, the AI companions and, the girls who are suddenly getting attention in chat rooms, because they're not getting it from their friends or from their parents or whatever. So if they don't seek those things out first, that's not a first option. That is a creative option because there's a deficiency on the other side. So it's a real call to action to keep those things happening. And we're still in a post-COVID recovery time where we fractured a lot of our social connections, and people are really rebuilding not just in the family, in our communities. We're not as we
Cohesive, connected.
yeah. And again, there is a cultural piece to it, but we went through years where we thought that person's going to sneeze on us, and so it kind of took stranger danger to the next level. And to your point, now that we have these little phones right in front of us, if you're standing in a queue at the grocery store, are you going to turn around and talk to the person beside you and talk about, hey, did you see the thing out there and whatever? It's like the minute you have a pause, you look down at your phone because you're not working as hard to connect to people around us. So I think it's our call to action that we need to make sure that we each have a personal responsibility to know that that is the mentally healthy way forward. And it's everybody's responsibility that we do that more. And yes, parents should have an educational conversation as well about how convincing the substitute is, but it is no replacement, and it comes with some real dangers and downsides.
I want you to maybe give a tip or work through for parents who are obviously concerned about this AI companion thing, and they want to spend more time with their teenagers, but they weren't doing that in the past. How do they broach that conversation and become more proactive and intentional to say, hey, it's not just mealtime, not just family meetings, but we as a family really need to spend more time together? How can parents approach that conversation with teenagers, especially if it's something new for their family?
Again, I'm trying to encourage them to do the family meeting thing. But even if you just have a one-off family meeting and you're just sitting down, breaking bread together, maybe it's at a restaurant somewhere, and there's just the nice vibe is kind of happening, and you just jump off that and say, you know what, like, I love this. I love what we're doing right here. I wish that we would do this more. And, life abhors a vacuum. We get busy, we forget. And, I don't want to forget. I want to make a conscious effort. Do you guys enjoy this? What could be the next fun thing that we could do? And again, generally in family counseling, I usually start with the homework of the first week is do something fun together as a family. But right there, you have to cooperate. You got to figure out what everybody wants to do. What does everyone want to do? Like, do you want to go to a matinee? Do you want to rent a bowling lane? Is that lame? Do you want to go for a hike? Do you want to put up Christmas decorations together? Do you want to plan a cousin's sleepover? So just toss out, brainstorm some ideas, but you've kind of said, I want more of this. Do you want more of this? Could we have more of this? What would that look like? And make that the problem that you solve together, as a family. Wait for that first vibe to be the springboard of more of this, please. I think most people, and I find it often, it comes off of holidays. I'm always surprised at how many people put all their grudges aside because they don't want to have a bad holiday. So I find post holidays are a good time to say, we don't have to wait to go away on a holiday we could be this happy every day in this house, same people.
Yeah. I think also what might work well for mid to late teens is to say to them, hey, I'm realizing we only have a year or two left before you're gone. You're not going to live with us anymore. Maybe we're only going to see each other during holidays. And my relationship with you is so important. And I see that you are about to leave the nest. And I really want to have more of those close interactions with you before you go. And I think teenagers hearing that might hear a sense of, oh, I matter to my parent. I'm really loved by my parent. They want to create these memories with me before I leave the nest.
And I'm also fine with a friend coming along because a lot of times, notice that a lot of people say like, oh, I love everybody else's teenagers. I just don't like my own. Well, and there used to be a tradition back in the agricultural farming days where you didn't raise your own teenager. They would have gone off and worked at the farm beside yours. And that was probably a way of keeping everybody sane. And then you would have taken in the neighbors to the left. You would have had them. But intermixing some other teenagers. And so bringing a bestie on a holiday or a trip to the cottage or an outing that you're doing is totally fine because usually the friend doesn't have any grief with you. They're like, why don't you like your mom? She's a wonderful lady. But they're there together. They're laughing. They're joking. You're present. And you're still, you're kind of third wheeling, or fifth wheeling, depending how many in your family. But your kid is probably more likely to be engaged in with you because their friend is there and not wanting to like run away to text their friend. So I've got nothing against bringing in a friend so long as you're still doing family things together.
Yes, yes.
It all counts.
Yes. So the closing question I have for you is if you could leave parents with one guiding principle for raising teenagers who are both responsible and deeply connected to their family, what would that be?
I've worked with so many discouraged parents. I feel like one of the messages that I want them to know is, a discouraged parent can't really encourage a child. When you've got kind of like a bad opinion of your child, it becomes a bit of a rate limiting factor in terms of building up the relationship. So I think one of the things that I would say is, guess what? Everything can be different. And could you take it upon yourself in all your frustrations and all maybe the history of things haven't changed yet to make it like a little Etch-a-Sketch kid's toy, when you shake it and all the sand goes and it's like, could you start tomorrow with fresh eyes? The Zen masters talk about having beginner's eyes. Could you just suddenly meet them right now as if you're meeting them for the first time and start fresh and just feel like you're doing a do-over and drop all the history of what's happened and just decide, to your point about putting that value first. Right now, what I really want to do is learn to get to know my kid and love them. And I'm going to make that my most important value. And I don't care if they fail a course, and I don't care if I don't like their friends. I'm just going to make that my job one. And having trust that the other goals that you have will actually follow in that order. And it might be a little chaotic but you kind of got your number one value as your goal. And that shouldn't be overwhelming if you remember that that's a pretty darn important goal.
Yes. Thank you so much. I think parents will definitely appreciate that advice. So, in addition to your podcast, Parenting the Adlerian Way, where else can parents find you if they want to connect with you for maybe counseling and join your groups and so on? Where can parents find you? What's your handles?
Thank you. Yeah. So my website is alysonschafer.com, ALYSONSCHAFER.com. And on my website, it does have all the links out to my social media. But on social media, I'm basically at Alyson Schafer. So you can pretty much find me anywhere there. And the podcasts, again, are on most of the major platforms, and you can see them on my website. And just because we're talking specifically about teens, I do have my Facebook page, but there's a subgroup for Facebook teens just for parents. And I try to jump on the regular and either do like a live Q&A or engage. People ask questions all the time. It's a super supportive group. So if you're just looking for other parents that are on this journey with the information that you heard today that you're intrigued with, you will get lots of people that will answer, that's too firm, that's too friendly, you're doing a great job. You won't, nobody will diss you. But you got a lot of people that have been working with these ideas for a while. So yeah, it's a really lovely, lovely community. So yeah, I would check out those.
Thank you so much. And I do hope parents will definitely connect with you to, give them the motivation and the encouragement and inspiration that, hey, it might be tough right now, but it definitely can get better. Thank you so much. And, communicating with us about how we can stay connected with our teens despite all the developmental changes that they're going through.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm really excited to catch up on all your different podcast content besides just this one. Thank you.
You're most welcome.